You'll never believe this, but I've spent over $1,140,000 in rent over the past 12 years. Here are the spreadsheets to prove it. You see, the problem is we love living in expensive cities. First, it was in Dumbo, Brooklyn, by that iconic shot of the Manhattan Bridge. Then we moved to LA right by the beach where we're in walking distance and I can go surf every day. Now, fortunately, we could have bought each of these homes, but we chose not to. Why? Because we value the ability to change and we value peace of mind. Yep, I wanted to be able to make one phone call every time we had a leaky toilet. Now, here's what people misunderstand in the rent versus buy debate. Yes, leverage is a powerful force, and forced savings are a real thing. But such a large purchase has to be driven by your preferences. How much do you value customizing your house? How much do you value the community that you live in? In this conversation with my friend Paco de Leon on the Weird Finance podcast, we talk about the pros and cons and under-discussed nuances of the buy versus rent debate. I hope you enjoy it.
Because the trope that we've heard a lot was renting was throwing away money. So when I look at a guy like you who has... You know, you could buy a home if you wanted to buy a home, but you choose not to. You choose to pay rent in high rent cities.
Yep.
What's the rationale behind that?
Yeah. Ooh, God, this is such a good question. And so come for the money, stay for the existential. This is what I love about this question is that it's actually, it's a finance question really, but it's how well do you understand your preferences? That's what it is. Because there's no right or wrong answer, right? And to be fair, if you knew that you were going to stay in the same place for 7, 10, I don't know exactly what the number is, years, you were like a high confidence and you knew you could support your mortgage payment, like you could withstand shocks. So renting you have leverage, They call it a leverage buyout for ordinary people. Like you have 5 times leverage on a very large purchase with what in the past has been a low interest rate and tax deductibility. That's basically how private equity works.
So could you say that using different words?
Okay. Yes.
Sorry.
So leverage means you borrow money to buy an asset. So let's say a home is $1 million. You would you only need $200,000 to buy the home only.
Right. Only.
And then you borrow $800,000.
Right.
So what happens is if that home goes up by 10%, your net worth doesn't go up by 10%. It goes up by 50% because you only put down $200,000.
Got it.
Right. So that's the power of leverage. Right, because think about it. If I'll go slowly, and feel free to edit or slow me down. But if you bought $1 million home, and it goes up by 10%, you have made $100,000 of profit. Right.
Right.
But you only put down $200,000 of cash.
Okay.
Right, because you borrowed the rest. So you made $100,000 on $200,000 of investment. That's 50%.
Right.
So people are like, oh, my home prices go up by 10% a year. If you're borrowing money, you have to, let's just say everyone puts down 20%. That means that for every percentage the housing market goes up, it goes up 5 times that amount.
Got it.
That's why so much wealth is in people's homes.
Right.
There's no other investment that you can make as a ordinary person where you could, like, if you wanted to buy Microsoft stock for $1,000, you can't put down $200 to get $1,000 of Microsoft stock.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point.
It's the only way you can do that. And we can get into the details of it, but it's also very safe. Meaning, even if your home, let's say you bought $1 million home, and the home, let's say aliens attack the entire neighborhood, except your home. Okay. Maybe your home's worth $1 because they destroyed the neighborhood. If you can still pay your mortgage, the bank can't take your house.
Right.
Even if it knows it's worth $1. That's a really powerful form of borrowing. Again, usually only reserved for very sophisticated investors.
Okay, but Kate, what you're illustrating to me is that I should buy a house.
So again, I think that there's a very strong argument for buying a house if you're willing to live in that place for like 7 to 10 years, because there's a lot of costs that go into that. And keep in mind, we're also leaving an environment of really low interest rates and really fast rising home prices. So it was like a Goldilocks economy for housing. So that might change going forward. But here's the other thing. So I don't know, a lot of people don't know where they're going to be in 7 years or 10 years, right? Like in 7 years, my eldest daughter will be close to college.
Yeah.
Right. What would have happened if, what if I bought a house thinking I could work from home and then everyone got called back to the office? Right.
Sure.
So that's the thing, is that selling a house is expensive, and selling a house shortly after you bought it is really expensive, because that leverage thing we described, it works the other way too. When you pay 6%, it's 6 times 5, because you're paying 6% on the million, not on the 200 that you put in. So it works both ways. So if you have time on your side, and low interest rates, it's a no-brainer, and you want to stay there. But let's go back to my point. It really is like, what are your preferences, right? And so some people's preference is they want to know that it's theirs.
Right.
Right. My preference is, if my life situation changes, I want to know that I can change with it. So like, if my business gets tanked, I want to know that I can downsize. And if my business does well, I want to know that I can move closer to the beach. Or let's say we're not trying to have a third. Let's say we accidentally have a third. Like, oh shit.
Yeah.
7 years, clock's ticking, right? You're going to wait 7 years. So you know that a lot can happen in 7 to 10 years. You can have more kids than you thought. You can lose a family member. You can get laid off. The job market you thought you entered in could change radically. You could live in a place that's now threatened by wildfires. So again, you could sell, but the minute you sell, like in that lower window, that powerful gain works. It slaps you in the face, like in the other direction. So
I definitely intellectually grasp this, but I think what's really hard for me, and possibly hard for a lot of other people, is that like lizard part of your brain that feels like, if I have this, then I'm safe. And I'm secure, even if that's an illusion.
Yeah. That's an interesting, in some, you don't have it, because if you have a mortgage, the bank owns it.
That's
right?
true.
So you got to pay that mortgage payment. You don't pay that mortgage payment,
you don't have it.
Right. The eviction,
foreclosure.
They're kicking your tire, So the bank owns it, because remember, 80% of the money that went towards it is the bank's money. It's not your money. So that'd be the first thing to remember. The second thing to remember too is that, especially as home prices start getting higher and higher and higher, that 20% down payment is a huge amount of cash, right? And by the way, that 20%, like if you rent, you don't have to pay that 20%.
Right.
So again, we're just using the $1 million house example. You have this extra $200,000. You can go invest it in the stock. So it's not like burning a hole in your pocket, right? So you can go invest it, and you could do lots of stuff. You can start businesses with it. You could spend it, right? And it's a buffer, right? If you think of that 20%, like you could do the math, but that's probably like 6 years of rent for the equivalent home that you were going to buy.
Right. Okay, I'm with you. I'm totally with you, because
but the lizard brain part, right?
Well, and I think it's because, like what you mentioned earlier, of like when you don't have it and other people have it, then you want it. right? You like compare, but we've been in a very low rent spot for many years. It's allowed me to start my own business. It's allowed my wife to start her own business. It's allowed me to take risks. Like, should I divert a bunch of time and do a podcast and write a book? And since we don't pay a lot in rent, we are able to truly invest the difference. And I think, it's kind of only in the recent handful of years that I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like, whoa, look at all those dividends finally. That's nice. And when I do, you're right, because when I do think like, are we gonna try to do this? Are we gonna like jump into this frightening, tremendously huge debt? I am like, this flexibility is pretty sweet.
And the burning rent thing the burning money thing is, it's a little, people don't realize that when you have a mortgage, it's like 80% of your, I forget the number, 70%, like a really large percentage of the money you're paying is just interest.
Yeah.
So you're by the definition of burning, you're burning a lot of money on interest. But here's the thing that I think, this is why I think that buying is a very good thing for a lot of people. So we talked about the leverage thing. The other thing is that it's two things. It's forced savings.
Right.
And a lot of people just don't have the discipline to just invest in the stock market. So it's forced saving, but I think it's something even bigger than that. And, you can go look at your house on Zillow and be like, oh, my house is down 2% or it's down 4%. But like, it's still this like really abstract concept because you couldn't really sell it. And there's all these fees and it's just really complicated. So you're like if your house was down 20%, like, do you think a lot of people would really like live their lives different? Like, assuming they could pay their mortgage, they would live their lives exactly the same way. They might not even, they probably wouldn't even know.
Sure.
Unless they like read the Wall Street Journal regularly. If your stock portfolio is down 20% and you like go in and you see that red and you're like, oh, the, 500,000 is now worth 400, you freak like 98% of people freak the fuck out and they're going to make the worst possible decision at the worst possible time. And so I think one of the really powerful things about buying a house is that it actually removes you from your worst investing instincts. And why is the majority of American wealth captured in Americans' homes? Because you have been removed from your own worst instincts.
That makes sense.
And that's we cannot underestimate that. And I think I'm unique even amongst my finance friends. They're like, how do you not sell? Don't you ever get scared? I'm like, no, it's just a number. Like, to me, the number goes up, down. Like, it's like I'm emotionally disconnected from that number. And so I don't need that forced savings. I don't need to be protected from my worst instincts when it comes to money. For again, God's grace, I'm good there. Most people are not. And so I think that's the reason. But I give you there's some other things. I mean, if we go to some of the nitty grittier side of things, Ramit, that people always talk about phantom costs. Right. And the phantom costs are huge, right? There's something too about like when you're a renter, you don't want to customize your house because you're like, oh, I might have to move in 3 years. But if you're like, this shit's mine forever, you're like, interior designer, come on in. Like, I hear these estimates of interior designers. You guys are batshit crazy. Right? You're like, yeah, but we're going to live here forever. And look, most of them will live there forever. But it's almost like going to Costco where it's like, I just want one coconut water. Like, no, you have to take 40. And I'm like, no, I just want one. And they're like, no, you have to take 40. Like, well, I guess I'm going to drink all 40 someday.
Eventually, yeah.
Eventually. And I think that home ownership is, because you're like, it becomes your baby.
Right.
And then you're like, well, and you start to make a lot of non-economic decisions. Like, any renovation is usually a waste of money. And people will jump through hoops to justify that the one that they did, like, oh, in my neighborhood, people love marble. Like, no, you are not recouping the marble.
You're ruining it.
you're not recouping it. Like it is so well documented that home improvements do not, and in fact, there's like a downside to home improvements because if you improve your home too much, you steer from the comps in your neighborhood. So the comps pull you back in. So you can't even improve your home too much because then you're an outlier relative to the comps. So anyway, I could keep going. There's so many more, but.
Well, this is great. Also, my wife is an interior designer and I understand trust. I understand the ridiculousness of I'm grateful, puts food on the table, but I look at her and I'm like, so this is a real problem that you're going to drive all the way over there and solve. The remote for the drapes. It's not working fast enough. It's not as efficient. So you're going to drive over there or you're going to deal with it. Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting.
But again, I go back to the 8 sleep thing. It's,
sure.
I do think that you have to love where you live.
Right.
Or no, let me rephrase. It is a significant contributor to your happiness if you love where you live.
Yeah, your environment matters.
Your environment, it's almost like an extension of your bed. So sometimes like a lot of the decisions are actually non-economic. So like hiring the interior, like putting marble, like, yes, if that makes you love where you live, but that what happens is people then they're like, this is a good investment. It's like it lives in this weird space of like, this is a good investment and this is just a purchase that makes me happy. And I think that really fucks people up because then they start thinking that their one renovation is going to drive all this value and they do this weird self-justification and you end up spending a lot of money because you think you're and then it can lead you like this friend that I was texting with who found the $100,000. He's just like, I'm a prisoner. He's a prisoner to a $5 million, $4 million house. Like, go figure. He's just like, I can't believe you rent. Right. And he's not getting sympathy points.
Sure.
For that. But I think it's like truly, I think people, they go into buying a home. They learn this stuff after they've bought it.
For sure. Which is why I'm really grateful to have this kind of nitty-gritty conversation with you, because I have been, it's hard not to hear, like, it's a contentious perspective, right? When people who have a lot of money and can afford to buy say, I'm choosing not to, it almost feels like, do you guys know like a trick that we don't? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I appreciate that you can kind of approach it on the one hand like a very level-headed finance guy, like here's how the math works out. But then you're also,
if you can stay.
But then you're very sympathetic to the fact that but a lot of what drives our behavior is what's happening between the years or how we're feeling, and then we figure out ways to rationalize and justify it later. That just, I think, is going to help. It's certainly going to help me. I hope it helps people who are listening, but it's certainly going to help me at least understand, okay, how can I put up guardrails, or when do I, really tap into check in with myself and try to be as self-aware as possible when there's such big stakes.
Yeah. And the last one, again, just to go on, because this is a really powerful one, is that there's something, because it's really, like I said, at the end of the day, it's really about your psychology. It's like the economics are secondary and the psychology is first. And so the psychology that's really powerful, and this is one that I'm kind of wrestling with in my own life, is that buying a home forces you to kind of say, this is my community. In a way that renting, it doesn't have that toothiness. Now, again, some people can simulate that feeling in their brains that like, no, I'm so invested in this community, in these neighbors, in whatever, even though I'm a renter. But again, most people are like, I'm here for a couple of years and then I'm out. And again, a deep human need is that sense of belonging, that sense of community. So I've never said this out loud because I just realized it. But the same way that buying a house kind of protects you from your worst investing instincts, I think buying a house also kind of forces you to have community in a way that the transience of renting doesn't. And I don't think people talk about that often, but there's something really nice to being like, I'm going to invest in this community because I have an economic stake in it. And it's hard for me to leave.
Right.
Whereas renters are like, I don't, if this neighborhood goes to hell, like when my lease ends, I'm out, And I think that that's something that shouldn't be underestimated. Again, deeply psychological.
Huh. Yeah, that's a good point. These are all great points. Thank you for helping me navigate this, soup in my mind of what I think is going on.
The pleasure. And that's, I love this because it's a classic example where people can just talk about spreadsheets and numbers and they will completely miss the point. Like the juiciest part of what we described are all these weird psychological things. They'll miss, no one's having that conversation.